I didn't leave my life. That's the part people misunderstand. Leaving requires courage. A moment of decision. A visible break. I didn't have that. So instead, I disappeared slowly, while staying exactly where I was. If you had looked at my life from the outside, you would have seen nothing alarming. I showed up. I answered messages. I fulfilled expectations. I was present in all the ways that mattered to everyone except me. At first, disappearing felt like a solution. I didn't argue. Didn't resist. Didn't demand anything. I simply reduced myself. Less opinion. Less emotion. Less friction. People call that being easygoing. Adaptable. Mature. No one calls it self-erasure. I learned early that conflict had consequences. That saying the wrong thing could change how people saw you. That wanting more than what was offered made you difficult. So I became smaller. Not overnight. Gradually. One unspoken thought at a time. I stopped correcting people when they misunderstood me. Stopped explaining myself when it felt exhausting. Stopped sharing parts of me that didn't land well. Each time, it felt like relief. Because disappearing is quiet. And quiet feels safe. What I didn't realize was that safety without presence is just another kind of danger. I told myself I was being patient. That timing mattered. That someday I would step forward again. But someday is a place where courage goes to die. Days turned into routines. Routines turned into identity. I became known for being reliable. Understanding. Low maintenance. People trusted me because I didn't ask for much. And every compliment reinforced the same lesson: you are easiest to love when you need nothing. So I needed nothing. Or at least, that's what I pretended. Inside, something strange was happening. I wasn't unhappy in a dramatic way. I wasn't crying in the shower or breaking down in public. I was neutral. And neutrality became my baseline. I woke up already tired. Not physically, internally. As if my mind had been holding itself in place all night. Moments passed through me without leaving a mark. Conversations ended and I couldn't remember what I had said. It felt like my life was happening a few inches to the left of where I stood. I remember the first time I noticed it clearly. I was listening to someone talk about a future plan, something meaningful to them, and I felt absolutely nothing. No jealousy. No excitement. No curiosity. Just distance. That scared me. Not because I wanted what they had, but because I realized I didn't want anything strongly anymore. Desire requires presence. And I was barely there. I told myself this was adulthood. That passion fades. That expectations adjust. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't adjusted. I had withdrawn. I started avoiding mirrors. Not because I disliked what I saw, but because I didn't recognize the person looking back. Their eyes looked familiar, but vacant. Like someone waiting for instructions. I began to understand something uncomfortable: I wasn't afraid of leaving my life. I was afraid of choosing a different one and being wrong. So instead of risking a visible mistake, I chose an invisible one. I stayed. But I stopped fully existing. I let decisions be made around me. I agreed without enthusiasm. I smiled without conviction. No one noticed anything was wrong. That was the proof. I had become optional in my own life. And that's when the thought appeared, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore: if I continue like this, I won't feel the moment I disappear completely. That thought didn't panic me. It saddened me. Because part of me already knew it was true. I wasn't living. I was fading carefully, politely, responsibly. And the most frightening part? I was being praised for it. Once I realized I was disappearing, I thought fear would wake me up. It didn't. Fear only sharpened the edges of my silence. I became more careful. More controlled. More determined not to cause disruption. Because now I knew what I was doing, and I kept doing it anyway. That's the part that's hardest to forgive. I started noticing how often I edited myself in real time. A thought would appear, clear and honest, and before it reached my mouth, it would be reshaped into something safer. Less sharp. Less personal. Less real. I didn't lie. I just omitted. And omission became my primary language. I avoided conversations that might corner me into truth. I changed subjects smoothly. I laughed in the right places. I became fluent in emotional evasion. People assumed I was calm. What they didn't see was how much effort it took to remain neutral. Neutrality isn't empty. It's compressed. It holds everything in without release. At night, the pressure leaked out. Not as tears. Not as panic. As exhaustion so deep it felt structural. I would lie in bed replaying moments I had erased myself from. Not dramatic moments. Small ones. A question I didn't answer honestly. A boundary I didn't set. A feeling I swallowed because it seemed inconvenient. Each one insignificant on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns create lives. I began to understand that I wasn't disappearing because I wanted to escape. I was disappearing because I didn't believe I was allowed to take up space. Somewhere along the way, I had learned that being tolerable was safer than being known. That lesson didn't come from one person or one event. It came from repetition. From subtle disapproval. From raised eyebrows. From the relief people showed when I didn't complicate things. So I learned not to. I learned that the fastest way to keep peace was to remove myself from the equation. And peace became addictive. Not because it felt good, but because it felt predictable. Predictability became my substitute for meaning. If I knew how the day would go, I didn't have to feel disappointed by it. If I expected nothing, nothing could be taken from me. That logic made sense. Until it hollowed me out. There was a moment, quiet, almost forgettable, when the weight finally became unbearable. I was sitting alone, scrolling through nothing in particular, when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had felt strongly about anything. Not anger. Not excitement. Not hope. Just a constant, low-grade absence. That's when the panic finally arrived. Not sharp. Not loud. Existential. What happens if you keep living without being present? Do you disappear completely, or do you just become a container for other people's expectations? I saw my future clearly then. Not in images, but in sensation. More days like this. More polite distance. More careful disappearance. No collapse. No rescue. Just endurance until even endurance felt pointless. That future terrified me more than any drastic change ever could. And still, I didn't act immediately. Because knowing the truth doesn't automatically give you courage. Sometimes it just removes your excuses. I was faced with a moral dilemma that felt almost unfair. To stay meant continuing a life that rewarded my disappearance, slowly erasing whatever was left of me. To leave meant disrupting people who depended on my silence, becoming the source of discomfort instead of the absorber of it. Either way, someone would be hurt. The difference was this: if I stayed, the person being hurt was always me. Quietly. Consistently. With no witnesses. I started testing reality in small ways. I delayed answers. I said, "I need time," instead of, "Sure." I let my discomfort show without explaining it away. Every time, my heart raced. And every time, nothing catastrophic happened. People adjusted. Or they didn't. But the world didn't end. That realization cracked something open. I had believed my disappearance was necessary. Necessary for harmony. Necessary for stability. Necessary for love. It wasn't. It was convenient. For everyone but me. The more I resisted disappearing, the more the life I was living pushed back. It demanded the old version of me, agreeable, invisible, accommodating. And I understood then, this life only functioned as long as I kept fading. The moment I stopped, it became uncomfortable. Unstable. Unsustainable. That's when the truth finally settled in, heavy and undeniable. I hadn't stayed because I was afraid to leave. I stayed because leaving would expose how long I had been gone. And I didn't know yet if I was brave enough to return. The decision to stop disappearing didn't arrive as courage. It arrived as exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't ask for rest, it asks for truth. I reached a point where continuing to fade required more effort than being seen. That realization scared me. Because it meant I had crossed an invisible line. I could no longer pretend I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I was avoiding myself. And avoidance has a cost. Once I saw that clearly, my old coping mechanisms stopped working. Silence felt heavy instead of safe. Compliance felt painful instead of peaceful. Disappearing felt like active self-betrayal. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to reclaim my life. I simply stopped abandoning it. That looked small from the outside. I answered questions honestly, even when honesty made things awkward. I let disappointment exist instead of rushing to neutralize it. I allowed people to misunderstand me without immediately correcting the narrative. And something unexpected happened. The fear didn't kill me. The discomfort didn't destroy my relationships the way I had imagined. Some connections weakened. Some changed shape. A few ended quietly. But what ended with them was the version of me that only existed to be digestible. That loss hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. There is grief in realizing how much of yourself you gave away voluntarily. There is shame in seeing how easily you made yourself smaller. I had to sit with that. Not punish myself for it, understand it. I wasn't weak. I was afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of being too much, or not enough. So I chose the middle ground where nothing is asked and nothing is given. But the middle ground is where identities go to disappear. Reclaiming myself didn't mean becoming louder or bolder. It meant becoming present. Presence is uncomfortable. It requires you to feel what you used to mute. It forces you to notice when something doesn't fit. It doesn't let you hide behind politeness. There were days I wanted to go back. Days when invisibility tempted me like a familiar blanket. It whispered the same things it always had: be easier. Don't disrupt this. You're overreacting. But now I recognize that voice. It wasn't wisdom. It was fear trying to protect a life that depended on my absence. I learned something important during that time: you don't disappear all at once. You disappear by agreeing to small erasures. And you return the same way. One honest sentence. One uncomfortable pause. One boundary that doesn't come with an apology. Slowly, I started to feel again. Not just pain, curiosity. Not just fear, desire. Desire felt dangerous at first. It reminded me of how much I had suppressed. But it also reminded me that something was still alive. I stopped asking myself whether people would accept this version of me. That question had kept me invisible for years. Instead, I asked, can I live with myself if I don't show up here? That question doesn't care about approval. It demands integrity. I still carry regret. Regret for the time I lost. For the moments I could have chosen differently and didn't. But regret is no longer a weight. It's a compass. It points to the cost of disappearing, and reminds me why I won't do it again. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in these words, if you feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, if your life looks fine but feels distant, if you sense that you've been fading quietly, hear this: you don't need to vanish to keep the peace. You don't need to be invisible to be loved. And you don't need permission to take up space in your own life. Disappearing is easy. Returning is harder. But it's the only way to live. I was afraid to leave, so I disappeared instead. And almost lost myself completely. I'm here now. Not fully certain. Not fearless. But present. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.